This episode of the Brutally Speaking podcast is brought to you by On Point Pomade. Keep your beard and hair looking on point with their line of pomades and beard oils over at onpointpomade.com. Use our code BSP15 at checkout and get 15% off your total purchase order. So thanks again to On Point Pomade for sponsoring our show. This episode is also sponsored by the Bean Bastard Coffee. Head over to thebeanbastard.com and pick up any one of their delicious hand-roasted coffees. Coffee lovers will also enjoy their hand-cut and handmade espresso candles and soaps as well. If you're in the Buffalo, New York area, head to their store located at 448 Elmwood Avenue. And thanks again to the Bean Bastard for supporting this show. The Speaking podcast is proudly sponsored by Rockabilia.com. With over 500,000 officially licensed items in their online store, you're guaranteed to find something you need. Use our code BRUTALLY and get 10% off your total purchase order. Now on to the show.
People say you have to have a lot of passion for what you're doing. This rings true because it's so hard that if you don't, any rational person would give up. It's really hard, and you have to do it over a sustained period of time. So if you don't love it, and if you're not having fun doing it, you're gonna give up.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Brutally Speaking podcast. I am your host, John, and this episode's guest is Josh Batista. You probably don't know who he is. It's not like a lot of the other guests where it's like, oh, he's part of this, band that you've been aware of for the last couple of decades or whatever, or even necessarily involved in a band that's, on the rise necessarily. But what's interesting about this conversation and how it came to be is that it literally started based on the crux of the show. Forever, I've talked about that this show is essentially what happens, and it's supposed to be when you kind of meet someone at a bar for the first time and you just have a couple of drinks and you start talking and talk about life and all these things. And it just kind of starts, you start kind of building a relationship with a stranger, essentially. And that is what happened with this. I had gone to Buffalo for the last Every Time I Die Christmas show and had run into Josh at the Pink. And somehow we were talking. I don't even remember necessarily what we were talking about, but I remember we kind of started talking about music stuff, the industry side of things a little bit. And it was one of those where, I had very much enjoyed talking with Josh, and he was like, oh my God, I got stories for days about things. And I just kind of, it struck me as something where I was like, I don't typically necessarily do this, but I should kind of lean into it a little bit more and maybe have him come on the show. So that's exactly what I did. It took us a little while to actually get this conversation down because as I ended up finding out, Josh is a very busy person between his band, No Chance for Closure, getting and kind of growing their own name locally out in the New York area. Most recently, actually announcing that they're doing a small run with Johnny Craig, but also that he DJs for the Emo Night Brooklyn stuff. And, that takes him all over. And it was one of those where, I'd be like, oh, what do you got going on? And then he would be like, oh, I'm flying to Miami, or I'm flying to Cleveland, or I'm flying here, or my band's got shows this weekend. And I'm just sitting there going like, the fuck do you have all the, because like I said, we never talked about that part. So I was just like, how the fuck are you constantly flying? I kind of felt like I did what a lot of people do to me when, I talk about like, oh, I know so-and-so, or I whatever, where it's like, who the fuck are you? Which maybe that should have been the name of the podcast. But it's one of those things where, Josh and I hit it off. And when we finally had the conversation, I really enjoyed it. But I also had no idea what we were going to talk about. So to kind of get into some of the more vulnerable parts of mainly Josh, I'll say, opening up about, some of his addictions and so forth and struggles that he's gone through in his life, was really, really interesting, and was one of those where when that happens, it's kind of a reminder of the impact and the specialness of this medium that literally, it's strangers kind of connecting over shared experiences and so forth, and just kind of allowing themselves to be open to talking about these things. So for that, I'm very, very thankful, and I was kind of surprised, honestly, to get some of this information out of Josh. But without spoiling any bit, let's get into my conversation with Josh, and I will talk to you all on the other side of it. Intro shit. So like when people are like coming in, they're always like, I don't know what that was. And most of the time it usually leads to interesting kickoff points of a conversation. Like, having Sergio from Quicksand on, he was like, oh, I've never really heard him, but I'm obviously like, growing up in New York was kind of big into hip hop and and it kind of led us down a whole rabbit hole. So it's always fun to kind of just throw an instrumental out there, and then people be like, I don't know what that was, but I was vibing with it. And you're like, all right.
Which is so funny, because as somebody who, like, born and raised in New York City, like, Dilla's Donuts was one of the things that, like, you had to listen to as a hip hop head. Like, you had to know who Dilla was.
Well, I think that's the funny thing, though. Like, and I've talked about it almost ad nauseum. So, I mean, it's funny and fitting to actually have someone know, I guess, some more history about Dilla than most people when I have them on and start talking. But it's funny because I feel like, like we had talked about at the bar at the Pink, I'm from the East Coast originally, but it's like Dilla is uniquely, and has been for me in my quest of like old hip hop, like growing up, that he has been the missing link when I found him between, East Coast, old school, West Coast, stuff like that.
Oh,
and the
100%.
link between him and where Kanye basically picks up, he was the missing link between that, that then pushes it forward.
Because like Kanye has said previously, if I'm not mistaken, like that Dilla was one of his biggest inspirations. So it was one of those things that, like, for me, I grew up and I think the other reason why I was so immersed in that hip hop culture is also I grew up right by Queensbridge. Like I still live right over there in like LIC Astoria. But like I grew up in this neighborhood when it was not a neighborhood you wanted to be in. And like and it's just so funny because now you've got like all these high rises and fancy restaurants, and but it all comes back for me to the music. Like I remember listening to Donuts. I remember listening to Mobb Deep and Nas and all the dudes that were local, like down the block. Like I remember seeing them get out their cars.
I feel like that's the crazy thing, and something I've talked a lot about. And I know every place kind of has a geographical like stamp on them on music, over the course of time. Growing up, and granted, I grew up in Delaware, which had no music scene, but like I've said, like having friends who would come from Philly, come from Jersey, come from Rhode Island, come from Mass, come from all these areas. It's like they were kind of bringing things in that were happening around the time. And that was also kind of then moving here to the Midwest, where I'm like, I remember the first time within the first couple of months of moving here, someone showed me ICP and I was like, what the fuck is this? So it's interesting to kind of just see how geographically, everyone kind of puts their stamp on stuff. And then by byproduct of growing up around, especially if you're in a culture, a mixture of a melting pot of cultures like New York and a lot of those East Coast places, being one of the original 13 colonies, you can't help but just kind of start adding the flavors and layers to it and stuff like that. And that was
1,000%. I mean, honestly, that's why the music I make is the music I make. It's I never wanted to. Like, I remember being younger and wanting to sound like somebody specifically, or wanting to make a certain sound, or wanting to emulate certain artists. And I just kind of had a come to Jesus moment where I was like, I actually don't want any of that. Like, I want to just do what I want to do and not put myself in a box that I think I belong in.
Interestingly, how do you think living where you did and being surrounded by the artists that, you know, you've been surrounded by and grew up with, do you think that kind of gave you maybe the permission to come to that conclusion?
I think it did. Now, because now that I'm thinking about like growing up in a fairly hip hop centric and even being in a Latino household, I would say that it's very fair that that conclusion was 100% a byproduct of my upbringing and like being from this area, because you know, obviously where I'm at is associated with hip hop, but like I grew up going to hardcore shows literally anywhere I could.
Right.
Like I remember all the times I used to go down to Jersey just to see Dillinger and Every Time I Die and like all the mayhem I used to get into in Long Island going to see all the bands out there. Like it's so funny that I don't think I've noticed that this is a recurring theme in my life where I like don't realize a lot of things about my life until they're put into perspective for me by someone else when they're like, "Oh, do you think this?" And I'm like, "Motherfucker, yeah, you're right."
I think that is a byproduct of, you know, I think when we were talking at the bar, I think we're roughly around the same age, but I think I was a little bit older than you. But it was kind of just one of those things where, you know, I had talked about going to therapy and stuff like that, as I now just blab incessantly about, because someone will be like, that's a really interesting thought or whatever. I'm like, oh, thank my therapy brain now. Because like now it's one of those things that I don't think, and same with like taking, you know, various hallucinogenics and stuff like that, where it's like, if you kind of go into it and you're willing to be shown and be taught something and not think that you know everything, then it opens up so many more things to you and allows you to kind of think things through, as someone's telling you, and you're kind of in the moment to be like, huh, I hear what you're saying and it makes me think this. And then you just kind of throw it back to the person almost as pros, like, what do you think? And, you know, like almost like improv, yes. And then you keep the conversation going that way. But I think it's really just kind of having lived a lot of life and talked to so many people that you kind of can find these throughways with people that you don't even know.
Yeah, it's actually like really remarkable, because I've always had a similar outlook, not necessarily the same approach, but my general thing has always been like, there's always something else to learn.
Yeah,
you're never going to know everything, but kind of the object is to try. Like, am I gonna learn all the things? Am I gonna know everything? No, not in a million years. But be open to the learning experience when you're having conversations, when you're in different places. Like, the idea is that you should be a sponge. You should take all of the things around you and find a way to make that apply to yourself. So, and that kind of brings it right back to where we started, where it's like you start off wanting to sound like something and you want to do something. And then eventually you kind of realize that the being the sponge and learning all the things is not about regurgitating what you receive. It's about taking in the knowledge and putting it in a different way.
Well,
and how it applies to you, rather.
Well, interestingly, as you were kind of saying that, it kind of made me think of a different approach where it's almost like, you know, for me, it kind of has taken a little while of doing something to find, quote unquote, my own voice, or I should say be more comfortable in expressing myself and expressing the things that I go through. And subsequently, I guess, kind of shedding because some people may look at it as a perceived ego, like, oh, well, why do you feel you should be able to talk or say these things or should have your voice be heard to whomever and, you know, create a platform? Where I almost think it's kind of something similar, but also severely different, where it's like, I didn't for a while. I didn't think I had anything worth a shit to say, but I found in time that there are people who are very like-minded with a lot of the things that, you know, I'll say or think. And therefore it's more of just thinking out loud with people and kind of trying to figure out like what else is there? What can I learn from somebody else? And I think that's kind of what it is. It's kind of seeking the freedom to kind of be able to be yourself creatively or whatever. And I think in this world, I think there's so much of that going on with kind of the younger generation of like, I'm jealous of kids that go to school now. And I know that bullying still exists, you know, for being bi or lesbian or gay or whatever, or poly or all these other terms that weren't as known when I was going to school. But I look at kids now and I'm like, I kind of am envious of you, because whereas I didn't give a fuck about a lot of things because I just didn't like, if I like this music, I like this music. If I like this football team, I like this football team. I don't give a shit. But I feel like there's more acceptance and inclusion now for a younger generation than there was when I was growing up. And I feel like I'm a little
100%.
bit jealous of that, because I feel like, and I wonder what my life would be and how different it would be if I had some of these tools and these avenues to kind of express myself that I didn't back then.
It's funny that you say that, because there's a lot of things where like I wish there was a lot of information available to us that wasn't when we were kids, like that, and I mean that even with the acceptance and even labeling things as being poly and or being pansexual versus bisexual, like understanding what the difference was and why I fit into whatever category I fit into. But it also comes back to what you're saying is, growing up, I didn't give a fuck. like say what you wanted, man. And I realized that I started to care more about what people thought, like, as I got older. And then I realized again, I was like, wait, why am I wasting my time with what other people think when I could just do what I want and be who I want to be, and not let any of that like get under my skin. I mean, it also, like, for me, comes from, I had a lot of life-changing things happen to me when I was really young. I had a car accident when I was like 12 years old, and I have permanent nerve damage in my feet that like I can collapse at any moment and have a relapse, because the way that the nerve damage works is that it's overactive rather than the nerves are dead. So I am constantly in pain. My entire life, from when I was 12 years old to now, I have been in pain, and I will be for the rest of my life. And that also helps put things into perspective, where you kind of have to realize that you're like, I live a life different to everyone else, and everyone else lives a life different to me, and you kind of have to be more accepting of that fact. And it's something you definitely have to get to, because I know, like, my journey, I was a piece of shit when I was younger. I know that. I know that I took a lot of things that were happening to me and I threw it back at the world because I was angry. I was in pain all the time. I was in and out of a wheelchair through high school. Like, I'm lucky that I got to where I am from where I was. Because I know that a lot of who I was when I was younger, a lot of that person I don't like today. Like, that would have been somebody that I would have probably slapped in the face. And then on top of that, like, I grew up with being on the spectrum. Just to add insult to injury, like, I have severe ADHD and I'm on the spectrum, so I get so go on, Bran. But like, one of the things that happens is that sometimes when I get super overwhelmed, I'll hurt myself, and it's completely involuntary. It's a type of stimming. Like, my brain is trying to restart. I'm so overwhelmed that I'm trying to figure out what's going on, and I just explode. And it's terrifying because I get thrown into the back seat of my own self. Like I am watching all of these things happen and just hoping I don't do anything like anything I can't undo.
Right.
And it's why, like, today I am not the person I was a year ago, let alone 5 years ago. And the adaptation that we have to kind of use to overcome the things in our lives, while, as we said earlier, taking in the things around us and using those to form something new, that to me is one of the essences of being a person, of being alive.
It's kind of funny as you were, saying a lot of those things. And, for those that, I'll probably end up saying this and prefacing it in the intro and so forth. But, we literally met at a bar because of the Every Time I Die Christmas shows and somehow got to talking about whatever. I don't even remember. I mean, it is the crux basically of why the show started, of just like, when you meet someone at a bar and you just start talking and for like an hour or whatever, and then the next thing you know, like you just kind of go about your life and maybe see them again, maybe you don't. Like that's kind of the rawness and realness of what I always wanted the show to be. And I think I do a pretty good job of that now. But regardless, as I'm kind of learning a lot of these things about you for the first time, one of the things that, as you said, about like kind of being a backseat passenger to kind of your own experiences of things that are happening to you. And I'm reminded of something, that my therapist had said, where, I had said something similarly where I was like, oh, I just feel like a lot of these things are happening to me, like, why did this person, reach out to me? And she had kind of put it in perspective for a minute and was like, maybe you weren't the first person that this happened to, but maybe, you're along the line of people that this person reached out to. And I was like, oh. And then she goes, a lot of times we think of the world happening at us, like we're reacting to what's happening to us versus kind of, understanding that sometimes you're not the star of the movie necessarily because we're the star of our own movies. But she goes, sometimes, and this is not, how I mean to say it, but like she goes, sometimes we always think of ourselves as the lead of the movie or as the hero, but sometimes we could be the villain or a bit character in someone else's story. And then she goes, and it's all about perspective and just kind of realizing that these things are happening to everybody, just in different capacities. And it was really eye-opening to kind of realize that. And it was more of you may be the star of your story, but you're just a minor character in someone else's. And I was like, holy shit.
I mean, 100%. Not to be an absolute nerd about this, but like, look at Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead.
That's a book. No, that's a show, right?
Yeah, it's originally a play.
Okay.
But kind of the idea,
Lost you for a second.
Characters from Hamlet.
Oh, okay.
And pretty much opening the entire story to about them. So we'd only seen one perspective of the story, and Rosencrantz and Guildenstern end up dying obviously in both tellings. But you kind of shift it to their story, which is something that you never would have thought about
right
previous to seeing Hamlet. Like you never would have thought, hey, what are we going to do? And one of the like really interesting things about Rosencrantz and Guildenstern is that they're almost aware that they're a part of someone else's story. Because they keep like flipping this coin. They keep trying to like discern whether this is reality or not, and they keep flipping the coin, and it always lands on the same thing until the end when they die, and that's when it changes.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you kind of think about that, and I think it kind of speaks to a bigger narrative at times where it's like sometimes you have to know what your role is and how to play it,
Yeah.
And I think, as at times, having been in managerial roles, sometimes my role as a manager looks different within an hour, even, where it's like sometimes I have to come in and literally be the everything that someone needs to help them get through something. But sometimes I need to be more of the office person who gets a lot of that stuff done and be like, hey, I need you all to do whatever. But then you're also managing various roles within your working relationships with people and growing them as well. Before I forget this thought, the other thing that you had said when you kind of were talking about, taking a back seat to something, I'm sure you've seen the movie Get Out. All right. So obviously when that came out, and I can't wait for Nope to come out and just have all of the conversations that are going to come from that movie too. But
100%.
When going to see Get Out, I remember, The Sunken Place. And I remember going on Twitter and someone was like, The Sunken Place looked like a TV for Chris because that's what he was always in front of when his mom died and he neglected everything. So it's kind of how he views the world from The Sunken Place. And Jordan Peele commented back, he goes, yes, everyone's Sunken Place looks different. And I was, again, just like mind blown with that, because it's like I feel like we all have that ability, I think, at times to detach ourselves from whatever's happening. It's almost a coping mechanism, I think, in some instances. In the others, I think it's just a byproduct of, conditions or whatever that we are in. But I think it's interesting, for you said, I'm in the back seat, because I feel like some of like the nightmares I used to have, and before I would read up on them, was I was always in the passenger seat and things were happening and I couldn't control what was happening because I'm a passenger. And then you like start looking up what these things mean, and it's like, oh, well, it's because you feel that you're a passenger in life and don't have control of it. And then you start going, oh, that kind of makes sense, and things like that. So to me, when you said that, I feel like I'm a backseat passenger to what's happening to me by me, I think it was a really interesting visual that kind of made me think of all of these things and these different iterations of how we deal with things.
But it's like, exactly, it's one of those things there that, speaking of therapy, one of the things that like my therapist always said that kind of did the same like mind blowing thing to me was that idea of like, not everything is personal, even if it has your name on it. Like it's or rather, don't take things personally, even when it has your name on it, because the idea is that it is still from someone else's perspective. It is not the thing you are intending to do. It's not they are viewing it through a lens that is not. It's not the same as yours. So you ascribing your lens to their feelings or their experience, it doesn't help anybody.
Right.
It all you're doing is creating a volley that isn't actually a thing you want to go back and forth about. So it really comes down to that like realizing that everyone's perspective is completely different, and that's also why I say like I realized that a lot of things about myself, like I didn't like who I was when I was younger because of a lot of that, because there was actually, and it was funny that you say, most people see themselves as the hero, but I think that even like in high school, there were times where I actually saw myself as the villain and I liked it. Like I was so used to getting things thrown at me that I was like, oh, I can turn the tables for once. And then I realized, like, but that's not how you go about it. Actually, like you have to get, again, as we were saying, take other people's perspective into consideration, and understand that not everyone has their own view and their own experience with life.
Yeah.
You never know who you're talking to. Like I've had issues with having I was talking about like being overstimulated and having kind of like a breakdown. Happened to be like in an airport because I couldn't comprehend how someone else's mistake, like, and again, this was in the moment, not necessarily like an overall thing, but like at the time I was so overwhelmed with the thought of I couldn't comprehend how someone else's mistake could become my problem and my problem alone. And it was something as dumb as like the bag check kiosk wasn't working. And they told me to get on the customer service line, but I was like, guys, I arrived here 2 hours before my flight. That line is hella long, and I have a show to do tonight. Like I was working that night. I was trying to get to Cincinnati to play a show, and they and like all my gear was in my was what I was checking, and they just kind of were like, oh, well, no one told you to stand in that line. I was like, actually, 3 of your employees told me to stand in this line. And now I've missed my flight because you guys weren't paying attention when anyone else was telling you what needs to go on. And now I have to figure out if I can even get to the show on time.
Yeah.
And I was freaking out, and they were just kind of like, oh, calm down, sir. And what's funny is I wasn't yelling at anybody. I literally, I started biting myself, because that's one of my stimming triggers is I either hit my head or I bite myself, and it's I as I said, like I see it happen, and I'm terrified by it, so I can only imagine how frightening it is to other people to see a 6'2", 200-pound man just chew into his own flesh. Like, it's probably fucking terrifying. So and it's really funny because it's always like, I always remember people always say things like, oh, calm down. And I'm like, has anyone not figured out that that's literally the last thing you're supposed to say to somebody when they're freaking out? It's like, have y'all not figured this out yet? Like, what's
I think in my time of working at a bar, you know, I wish I was 6'2" and I'm over 200 pounds, but I wish I was, you know, that tall and physically imposing, because at times, you know, being a door person, I feel like that's what everyone expects, is just like, oh, shit happens, I'm picking you up, I'm whooping your ass, and then I'm throwing you the fuck out of the bar. And that's not really my vibe. Like, my vibe has always been like, let's talk about things. And, you know, very recently there was some shit that was kind of popping off, and our bar is a very, like, almost like the Pink. It is a very regular bar. And it is inviting to outside people, but you know, you're going to run into half of a bar full of regulars that have been drinking there for anywhere from a decade to 3 or 4. And in that, sometimes you obviously mix alcohol and just people, like, and sometimes when we go over capacity, people are just kind of on top of each other, and it creates tensions and so forth.
Oh yeah, you don't have to tell me that my job when I'm not, you know, a touring DJ or touring with my band, like I'm an F&B director. I run restaurants. Like I and bars, actually, but bars were my specialty, and then I found out accidentally I could cook. But like it's funny that you say that, because even when I have been the person that was supposed to be the one that was the imposing force, I actually found that a lot of the time, if I came with that energy, like being the big dude,
you're met with it.
Exactly. Like nobody, or it was the opposite, or not the opposite rather, or where they would be like, oh, you're not that big. Because the thing is like, yeah, I'm 6'2", but I do not look it. Like, yeah. I slouch. I have terrible posture. Like it's all these things where it's like, I don't look imposing, even though I am of a size that most people would consider to be so.
Yeah.
So when I tried to do that thing, like, it's almost like people would sniff out that it's not genuine. Like, I'm not that person. And as you were saying, like, I realized one of the best ways to get around that is try to be someone's friend.
Yeah.
Like talk to them like you've known them for a while, or try to get to know them in that moment and be like, hey man, I get it, but I'm not the one who makes the rules. And even if I were the one that makes the rules, like if other people are uncomfortable and the cause is you, dude.
Yeah.
There's one of two things that has to happen. You either have to fix your shit right now, or you got to get out of here.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the hard part, is kind of, and quickly to address someone. And I remember, like I was saying, there's a thing, this guy was just sitting there, like somehow he bumped into someone, or I don't know what started it. I didn't see that part, but then I just see like one of my regulars kind of talking shit. Like the dude's just like, shut the fuck up, man. Like, we're done. I'm sorry. Like, whatever. He just turned around, and then someone's like, oh, if you would have done this, I would have done this. I would have. And they're literally right behind him. So then I walked up to him, and I walked up to one of our regulars. I was like, hey, would you guys mind switching seats? So he's at the end of the bar. Now he's not right behind them. They say something, it's whatever. And then I like asked our regulars, I was like, hey, can you guys go to the back of the bar? Like, I just don't want this to turn into anything else. Like, it's done, it's squashed. Let's just separate and like continue to have a good time. And then the guy, like when he was done, he was like, yeah, man, I'm sorry. Like, da-da-da. I was like, no, it's fine. Like, nothing happened. I'm just trying to make sure that nothing happens again, because I know this is how people pick at each other and shit like that. And it could escalate again. So let's just remove everyone, kind of start over, have a good time now. And he was like, thank you for not kicking me out right away. And I was like, well, nothing happened yet for me to do that, but I see that the potential for something to happen could, so I'm rectifying that now so I don't have to kick anyone out. And it's one of those where he was like, just thank you for talking to me like a person. And I get that more often than not. And the funny thing is, I tell people all the time, I'm like, I'm just treating people how I would want to be treated in that situation. I don't want to be yelled at, or I don't want to be fucking manhandled by someone because I'm apparently out of line. And maybe I didn't even know. I mean, we're dealing with drunk people. And I think that's the hard part, is we again don't see ourselves in others when others do things. And I think that's been the biggest thing for me as a door person, is I don't really talk a whole lot, because I would just blow out my voice doing it, a couple of days a week. But beyond that, I'm the eyes and ears of the bar. And there's been times where, like I said, I'm not a physical person, but there was one day, and, I'm going to preface, anyone listening to this, sorry for the language, but like this dude was going on, and he was like acting like he knew all these people. Like he would just sit at like one of our big tables with a group of people, and you could kind of tell like they didn't know him, but he acted like, or maybe he did think he knew them. But then he would start talking about something, and the guy was gay, and he just would kind of like find the dudes, and then would be like, oh, have you ever, like, it just kind of like make them feel awkward about, like you'd ask things like, oh, have you ever thought about being with a guy, or things like that, just kind of starting shit. And I kept seeing it throughout the night, and he would talk to girls, and the girls would kind of be like, I don't know what the deal is with that dude. And everyone's like, do you know him? And I was like, I've seen him in here one other time before with someone that I don't like at all. And I was like, so I've seen him once, and he was fine then, but there was like no one here. But seeing him just kind of go around would be like, he seems like a regular who's not. And the way I see him talking to people, it's almost like he's trying to bait them into arguments or something. Like he gets off on causing.
He's actively antagonizing.
Yes. So at the end of the night, there was a fight that happened. A dude went to grab a chair. One of our bartenders thought that he was going to grab the chair to hit at the dude. And I go, no. His jacket's under the table, under this chair. He's trying to get it. And then when someone pushed him to get him away from the chair, that's when since he still had a hold of it, then he grabbed it. And I was like, no. And then the other dude's yelling, and he's like, where the fuck's my girl? I was like, your girl's over there with our bartenders. It's fine. I'm literally running back and forth, like trying to cause damage control between these two. They go outside, and if you've worked in a bar, and anyone listening to this, if you've ever seen fights at a bar, you know how rare this is. Our bartender, one of our other regulars, knew both of the guys, was like, you guys are the same motherfucking person. If you were here on a Sunday, you'd be watching football, whatever, having a good fucking time. And he's like, squash the shit and like fucking, say you're sorry, basically. Like, this is bullshit. And then the guys were like, yeah, I'm really sorry. And the guy's like, I'm sorry. Like, this happened. And he's like, I would have done the same. And then they both were like sharing a cigarette, and they're like, let's go inside and have a shot. And I'm like, yo, this shit's getting squashed. I've never fucking have seen this ever. Kudos to you guys. And then this dude who kind of was like starting the shit was like, I'm going to fucking punch you, to one of the guys. And we're like, dude, please get the fuck away. Like, you're just now you're trying to amp this up to be something that it doesn't need to be anymore. So he then comes and sits down with another table right at the big table next to me. And I'm already fired up because it's like, and let's like past last call. We're about done. Most everyone's out. And I see him starting in with these two other dudes. And he's like, oh, are you guys like friends? Like, how long have you known each other? Da, da, da. And then he's like starting to be like going in with this like gay stuff. And I'm just like, you can see him kind of getting a little agitated. And they're like, no, it's just not us, man. And he's like, oh, so you have a problem with gay people? And he's like, no, we didn't say that either. And then like, so I see like them getting a little bit awkward and weird. And I'm like, and then so finally like, and throughout the night he kept going like, oh, I'm Carter, da da da, I'm a twink, this, that, and the other. And I'm like, that's also very weird. Why would you say these to strangers?
Yeah, that's not how you open that anyway. Like even if you were trying to smash, like that's not how you. That's not a cold open, dog.
So at this point, I'm done, and I'm like, dude, get the fuck up. Like, you're done. Get the fuck out of my bar. And he goes, you can't talk to me like that. I go, the fuck I can't, dude. Like, I'm the bouncer. I work here. You don't. Get the fuck out of here. Like, you have been causing problems all night. He goes, I haven't. I go, how about this? How about this? And I started pointing to like people that were still in the bar. I go, that person. You just started shit with these two. You started shit with the people that started the fight. Then you started shit outside with those people that we were calming down. I go, you just been antagonizing people all fucking night. Get the fuck out of here, dude. And then he was like, well, it's still this time, da da da. And I go, shut the fuck up. I don't care. Shut the fuck up. Get out. You think you have a voice here. You don't. Shut the fuck up. Get out of here. And then like I hear someone and I go, and I don't ever yell at anyone. And now I know my bartenders and everyone are listening to me. They don't yell at anyone. So you know you have to be a real fucking asshole if I'm yelling at you because I don't. So I go, get the fuck out of here. And he started to say something. I go, let me say it how you'll understand. Get the fuck out of here. Get the fuck out. Please leave. And then he just was sitting there and I'm like getting close to him, but I have like my arms folded and he goes, don't touch. I was like, I'm not fucking touching you. And I go, but if you don't get the fuck up out of here after I've asked you for the last 3 minutes to get the fuck out of your seat and leave, I will pick you in your twink ass up out of that chair and I will throw you the fuck out of here. Please get the fuck out of here. And then he was just like, and everyone was like, and I go, don't act like I can't say that. You've been saying it to everyone all over the bar. I go, so if you don't like it, please get the fuck out of here. Please get the fuck out of here. And then like my bartender was just like, here's a shot. And I was like, thank you. But it was one of those, like, I felt really bad at first yelling at this dude, but I was like, no, like you have been causing problems the whole fucking time that you've been here. Like I should have done kicked you out a while ago when I saw you antagonizing people all fucking day or all evening. And I should have said something then, but I was like, it doesn't seem like everyone's confused. And that was the part that was confusing to me. Cause I was like, how do I handle this when no one's openly complaining about something, but something needs to be done, and I just don't know how to handle this.
100%. Like there's also like that weird line that we walk as bar people that like where you kind of have to take the good of the bar into consideration over your own ideas of what's happening. Like you might think that you have an idea of what you're looking at, but you, as you're talking about, it's all about perspectives. Like we don't actually know what people are seeing.
Yeah.
And particularly something like that is wild because it's like, you're sitting there being like, okay, so this guy's like kind of starting problems, but he's not getting aggressive to the point that I have to kick him out. And if he's still buying drinks, if he's still supporting the business, it's kind of my job to actually keep him here. If it like, as long as it's not getting to the breaking point or anyone's breaking point.
Right.
Like if it's, you know, sometimes you don't, it's almost like a treating things like they're bees where you know that if you make the wrong move, it'll sting you. But like, actually, it's only just a mild nuisance. And if you can get everybody to do the thing you're supposed to do with bees is just ignore them.
Yeah.
Then you can find that equilibrium in the space and you're like, okay, we're good. I don't have to worry about it. If I can get everyone to treat them like a bee. And then at the very end, like sometimes bees sting, man, and you have to figure out how to squash that before it gets worse.
Go ahead.
Yeah, as you're saying.
No, I was gonna say I had a really interesting one, and it was one that as I it really perplexed me, and I didn't really know how to bring it up to anyone because I was like, we're not in that situation, so I don't know. But it was interesting. I had so I'm very pay very much attention to a lot of body language in people. So like sometimes I'll see a dude come around and the body language from the women is kind of back and not like engaging in conversation. So I'll usually like if the person goes to buy a drink, I'm like, are you okay? Like, is this cool? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, all right, well, if you want, if he's buying you a drink or whatever, and you don't want him to handle it, give me a like nod or whatever. And I'll say something to the bartenders and let them know that from this moment forward, like any drinks that person makes for you, like they'll bring to you. Just, trying to be nice and those kind of things. Cause I see how shitty dudes can be and see it all the time. And it was one of those things where I saw the same behavior, kind of that predatory behavior from a woman to another woman. Like, hey, keep drinking this. Like the girl ended up throwing up, and then it was like, okay, like let's go. I'm gonna take you home. And I'm like, I feel like I should say something and be like, no, I don't think you should take her home, man. Like that seems not okay. But it was weird because it's the first time I've experienced it in that capacity where it's not a more hetero relationship or however you want to define that. But it was one of those that like afterward, I was like asked one of the women that bartends, because most of our bartenders are women. And I was like, should I have done something there? Like, I don't know. I don't know what the protocol is with that, because it's not what I would think of to look for that.
Yeah,
but all the same things are there. All the like the body language, the over like I'm buying you all these shots, and then all of a sudden it's when you're like falling down and at your most vulnerable. Well, now
like,
I'm going to take you
take
home, and it's like that. If it literally were a dude and a woman doing that, I would be like, yeah, man, like no, she ain't going home with you, dude. But I'm kind of like, all right, but you seem like you guys are friends, and I don't know, maybe I'm overstepping or overthinking things here, and I don't want to make it awkward or weird for myself or the bar either. So at that point, it's just kind of like, I guess when I see this person the next time, I'll be like, hey, were you okay? Or like, do I need to kind of pay more attention to you and or that situation in the future? And to me, that was kind of an awkward thing to try to work my way through and navigate, because it's like, I, as a straight white person, it's like at times even saying or being like, hey, I think I'm seeing something. It's like, well, it's not what you think it is. And it's like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'll just sit down and shut the fuck up then.
It's funny because this actually brings it back to what we were talking about, where like, you were saying that, how different would our lives be if we were growing up now?
Yeah.
In a place where we are actively seeing that things are not exactly how we originally perceived them. Like the idea that 20 years ago, buying a girl a drink was a thing that everyone just did.
Yeah.
And now, now we have more knowledge and we understand that like that can be something that's predatory. And there's a lot of things that I find that if we educated, not even just, I mean, particularly educating, young male identifying humans and people who are prone to aggression rather, to kind of recognize these things within themselves, or to understand that these things are not okay.
Yeah.
Because I that also comes down to like, there's a lot of things that as I was saying, it's like I didn't like the person that I was when I was younger, but I realized that like some of that was because I didn't realize the things I was doing were as toxic or were as predatory or were as frankly fucked up as they were. Like there is a level of miseducation or not being led to the right paths growing up that like kind of put us in a weird situation. But I also recognized those behaviors and was like, I can't do this. This is not an acceptable way to behave. Yeah. And and I feel like when we were going back to like acceptance, it also comes to education too, like having people understand that the behaviors that they are engaging in are problematic behaviors.
It's interesting, as you know, I was talking with, and I literally talked on record doing one of these with my tattoo artist, where we talked about, being almost 40, or I think in his case, I think he is 40, but being almost 40 and having kind of the understanding of how hard it is to grow and adapt to the changing times, because we remember how things used to be and how we grew up and all those kind of things, but
Yep.
we also still want to be, we're not shitty people. So it's like we want to try to be as inclusive to whomever now, but we're still learning. And it's like, I had made the comment to him. I was like, I feel like, and I see it all the time at the bar, I see some of the people, the older people who are, 10, 15, 20 years older than me, in their 60s or whatever, where it's like, they're still using outdated language. They don't quite understand the world, and that it's changing, and how things are and how things are perceived and things like that. But it's interesting to see, even in our small petri dish of our bar, we have a regular who is an out gay man, and he also happens to be black, and everyone loves him. And it's so funny to see how accepting, I think, over time, of him coming there and just kind of sharing his life and his world with these people, how they have kind of learned to, I don't want to say accept, because that sounds kind of shitty, but it's like they've learned that maybe these people are that they're not so different from everybody else. But it's all these, decades and decades of, not having people be out and proud and be vocal about it, that I think it just takes time. There's a learning curve. And I think for some older people, I think it takes a lot longer to learn these new things, because it's like, well, why can't we just go back to the way it was? And it's like, well, it wasn't always the best way, and we're finding new ways and better ways to be.
Well, and exactly, like when that's the other thing, and that goes back to even what we started with, was the idea of, wanting to, or like for me, as I was saying, like my outlook being that there's always something new to learn. And it's the same idea that, like, there's different, it all comes back to the idea that realizing there's different perspectives, and that they're not all in line with you, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything is wrong with their perspective.
Right.
Now, obviously, there are certain perspectives that 100% are problematic. I'm not going to be like, everyone's okay because they live their own lives. Like, no, there are things that people do and say that should not be done and said. But to your point, that rather than acceptance, I think it's more about understanding how to interact with people that you otherwise would not interact with. It's just being honestly, it comes down to just being a decent fucking person. like as you said, like, as a bouncer, you try to see yourself in, or like see other people's perspectives, and put yourselves in their shoes and be like, oh, this person is not acting out of malice. It's they're getting tossed around, and they're just trying to figure out what the hell they're going to do next.
Yeah.
And it's funny, because actually, like, it's just as simple as, if you have somebody who has never really encountered people of color in a meaningful way, or LGBTQIA plus identifying people, and like trying to find a way to identify with them. Like, if you've never interacted with these people, it's safe to say you're gonna have a closed-minded approach to it. But if you kind of attack things with that, look, everyone has their own perspective, and I'm going to go into this conversation being open to be like, oh, what do you have to say? Now, of course, if they, as I said before, like if they start talking some crazy shit, you're like, oh, okay.
I think the thing, about all that, and I guess I can kind of parlay it a little bit into, the music industry side of things. I think what's been interesting is I kind of have always found myself, gravitated to strong individuals who kind of are very confident, even if it's just outwardly in who they are. And I think that's always gravitated me toward music and musicians and so forth, and why I kind of started doing this, because it's like, you get to talk to these people typically in a long form fashion now, but instead of me now doing the press junket where I'm literally talking about a record, it's like, let's just talk and like find out more about you, because like we have social media and a lot of people are able to curate the perfect social media existence. And, we look at something like Johnny Depp and Amber Heard now, where all of their skeletons are being revealed. And you're like, man, you guys are both terrible fucking people. You kind of deserve each other. And you both are the reason that you both probably did all these things, because you're both toxic fucking people. But beyond that, the thing that's been interesting about doing the show is just kind of getting to learn more about people that, are a little bit more, I think, hidden per se. Like, someone that I'm excited to talk to soon, if it pans out, is Billy from A Perfect Circle. And to me, it's like, I know he's going to probably be doing a bunch of press, but it's like, I've not really heard him do a lot of long form stuff. So to me, getting to talk to someone like that existed in a time where we didn't have social media, we didn't have all these things. It's like, it's fun to kind of unearth these things about people we've admired and learn who they are as people. But beyond that, I feel like it's taught me that, we're so similar to a lot of people. Like, Patrick from Ice Nine they were in town a couple of weeks ago, and he came to our bar, and one of our regulars was just like, oh man, like, do you really love Grand Rapids? You said you did, and your singer and the guy from Motionless said he loved Grand Rapids. Like, do you guys really like that, or is that just something you say? And he goes, well, I can't speak for them, but I know I love it. Like, the Intersection is one of my favorite venues, like in all of anywhere. I love this city. Like, John and his wife, they come to Buffalo, and they said they love Buffalo for the same reasons that I love Buffalo, but why I also love here, because it feels like Buffalo. Grand Rapids feels like Buffalo. Buffalo feels like Grand Rapids. Just like cities kind of like Pittsburgh and some of those kind of industrial cities along a waterfront or whatever feel kind of the same.
Yeah, it's that like that small big city feel that's
B
really
market.
awesome.
It's the B market feel. But it's one of those that, like, and kind of getting to befriend a lot of these people and just kind of sharing conversations with them about, their experiences and so forth. I feel like it's so interesting to the people I gravitate toward are usually very genuine and very honest and real. And I know that that's not always the case, because this industry, I feel like at times will pit one another against one another for perceived reasons that aren't valid at all, other than just someone may not like another person. So it's like, well, you got to watch out for that person because they're X, Y, and Z. So kind of how have you found between, DJing and playing in the band, though? I mean, they're similar realms, but they're not in the same capacity of the demographics that you're playing to and maybe the rooms you're playing to.
Oh, they're they are completely different monsters every time. Like this weekend, last weekend, I just DJ'd to 2,000 people. Like, I had a sold out show in Boston, and and then next and Friday I'm playing sold out show in DC, but then the next Friday I'm playing with my band in Delaware to like maybe 100 people. Like, it completely changes, but also like I find that being yourself 100% and being that down to earth person with people as a musician, as someone that people see on that stage and they kind of put you on a pedestal. And I feel it's important to humanize. Like it's important to realize, no, I'm just a person. Like when I used to work in fancy restaurants, and I'd have people who I like idolize come in and be like, "Oh my God, you're here," and it's like, but that's not what what you would want as a person. You wouldn't want to feel like an animal in a zoo being gawked at. You'd want to be talked to. You'd want to be interacted with, and sometimes you don't want that at all. Sometimes you've actually been overloaded with stimulus and been talking to people all day, and it's just nonstop people, and you want to just go out and have a drink and not talk to anybody. Like, it can be both things. But if somebody is coming to you in earnest and they're like, hey, I really enjoy what you do, personally, like, I don't think you really have a right to. I'm trying to get the. There we go. I don't think that you, as a performer, like, you kind of have a duty to not be a dickhead about it. Like, I've had moments where people come up to me and I've just said, hey man, thank you so much. I don't want to be rude or anything, but I've just had a really long day, and I just kind of need to take some time to myself. And one of the times that I did that, the person left me alone, and I finished my drink, and then I was like, you know what? Screw it. And I get up and I get another drink, and I walk over to the table. And I'm like, hey man, sorry before, like, I was not ready to hang out and talk, but like, if you'd like to talk and hang out, like, I'm here for it. Like, let's do this. And he seemed so surprised. And I was like, no man, like, I didn't, like, at no point was I trying to be a dick, and I even said that the first time. So like, when I realized, hey, maybe I do, like, I am okay to talk to people right now, I'm not gonna just shrug you off. Like, you came to me, that shit takes guts. Like, if I were sitting in a bar and Maynard James Keenan was sitting there drinking a glass of wine, I don't know if I would initially have the balls to say anything to him.
Right.
But then you have that, like, moment where you're like, no, just treat them like a person. Don't treat them like, oh, this is the singer from, or this is the guy from. No, this is this dude I met at a bar. Mm-hmm. Like, right back to what you were just what you were talking about is how you, like, started this whole thing. Is that the concept of this is the guy I met at a bar is way more powerful than, walking up to somebody and, like, having this idolization in the back of your head. It's just like, but it also, for me, it's also about, like, even people that we have been, that we've, like, come to demonize or to realize, or to, like, outcast. There's also two sides to every story. Like, as I was saying, like, I know that a lot of the things that I did when I was younger, when I was struggling with addiction, and when I was just doing lots of dumb shit, like, I don't agree with a lot of the things that person was doing, that I was doing. And, sometimes you have to have your come to Jesus moment. You gotta have your rock bottom to be like, this is not who I want to be.
Right.
So, even with people that we've learned to almost demonize, give them a shot. Talk to them first, because if you come up to this person and you've heard nothing but bad things, and they confirm all of those bad things, that's a completely different story.
Right.
But you don't know what people have actually been through. You don't know what they've gone through that have brought them to the place that they're at now.
100%. Oh, excuse me.
I mean, my band literally just scored a crazy tour. Like, we're playing with Johnny Craig.
Okay.
And it's that thing where, like, immediately I had that, like, knee-jerk reaction of, oh, well, this is the person that did this thing and did this and is an addict and whatever. And it's like, no, man, I have to take that out and just talk to him once. Like, he's still a person. He's still somebody that deserves at least a chance to show me who they actually are and not who I think they are.
Right.
And, you know, and I know a lot of people personally who've had awful experiences with this dude. So it's like, I could let that color my opinion of him. But like, also when you're going on the road with somebody, it's not exactly a great idea to be like, oh, fuck this dude. Like, like even if there's every reason in the world to say that, that's not the kind of energy you should be bringing into a conversation. Like when the same thing that we were talking about, like working at a bar and you see a guy being a piece of shit, your job is to actually avoid having any physical altercation, is to avoid a fight.
Yeah.
So you're actively trying to make sure that you can talk to this person like a person.
Yeah.
Like, I could physically see you do some terrible shit and be like, ugh. But it's now my duty to at least try to reason with you in order to, as we said, get you to do one of two things: fix your behavior, or you get the fuck out.
Yeah.
And so it's important to be able to like to separate those things, because, you know, you have to maintain that level of humility because you don't know what other people are going through. Like, I've had a lot of struggles in my life with, as I said, like with my nerve damage, with literally being on the spectrum, with drug addiction. Like, I have gone through a lot. So it's important to make sure that everyone is kind of at least heard out to a point.
Well, I feel like a kind of bigger talking point that a lot of people don't want to address because it's sort of puts it back on them to a degree. But, you know, in a situation, we'll say like with Johnny Craig, like obviously for the most part, I'm assuming anyone who's listened to this knows what he's done. If not, quickly Google his name, you'll find it.
You'll probably find about 9 results that say MacBook.
Yeah, Johnny MacBook. But it's one of those where I think it speaks to a bigger thing of like, okay, you know, you've kind of said throughout this whole thing of, you know, I didn't like who I was. Now there is someone, or there are probably many people who knew you then, and that's who you always will be to them, because they probably won't take the time to get to know you. And that's not entirely wrong, because you were that person. But I think the thing that we as a society and a culture are bad at is we never allow someone to grow beyond that. Like, you know, I had a nickname in high school, and there's very few people who still call me that. But it's one of those where when I see those people and they call me that, like, especially people I'm not really friends with anymore, I'm like, oh, like that's who I always will be to you, is that person, even though I've lived, you know, that's almost 20 years ago. Like, I would hope that you're not the same person as you were in high school, because if that was the case, that's really sad for you. But secondly, like, it's one of those where I don't feel like at times we believe that people can change. And until you kind of, I think, go through a giant metamorphosis yourself, or have seen one happen firsthand, I think you don't understand what it's like to just kind of always be viewed at in this capacity. And, you know, I think a bigger one, you know, for me was Tim, you know, from As I Lay Dying. And a lot of people, because I always, without getting into a long drawn out story, I went through something with a friend where, you know, they ended up having to go to prison and stuff like that. And to see the comments and the like getting crucified in the online comments about things about this person attacking their integrity, who they are as a person. And I'm like, you don't know this fucking person at all. And like to know what I saw and know things that I know firsthand that no one will ever know because it never got out. But it's one of those where, you know, seeing kind of the Tim thing through a prism of a lens of what of my own experience, you know, when Tim got out, everyone was like, oh, he didn't serve enough time. And it's like, well, who are you to say? I know he didn't serve his full sentence, but he was out on good behavior. So if you don't think that is, you don't think that the people who are in place who make these decisions are making the right ones, then I think it's not necessarily about the person. You don't believe that potentially it comes down to, you don't think the rehabilitation process works, which if that's the case, then that's a completely bigger talking point than anything else. And it's one of those where, to me, that is a bigger thing. And, you know, all along, you know, I had made the comment, I was like, Tim was all roided out. And they're like, so? And I was like, you don't think that putting a chemical into your body that literally changes your body is going to affect you mentally? And they're like, no. And I was like, so someone who does heroin and steals shit and then gets clean and sober, now they're fine because they've changed. And I go, but they literally were doing the same thing. They put something into their body, and now you use, in that instance, well, that's not who they really are, because they were on these things, these circumstances. And it's like, so why is it okay for this person to be a shit person, do horrible things, but then turn their life around, and you go, okay, I've forgiven and I forget, and I'll let you back into my life. I'll let you, you know, become the person you're trying to be. But this person over here, well, they're never forgivable. And it's like, again, you can't have it. It's not black and white like that. Like, you have to, if you say a heroin addict who does horrible things, lies, cheats, steals, does all these things, if you're willing to forgive that person and let them rehabilitate and become the person that they were before or whatever, then why can't this other person? And the only thing that I feel like it comes down to is really in entertainment as a whole, because we, like you said earlier, we put these people on a pedestal. We build all these people up because we want to see them fall, because then we can go, oh, I'm better than you because I didn't do that or whatever. And I think it gives us collectively this sense of, I don't want to say entitlement, but I think it gives us a sense of just knowing that you're better than the perception that you're better than someone. Because
I mean, it comes down, like, it comes right back to like the idea of like people just the holier than thou. Like, it's just people wanting to make themselves feel better about who they are because they feel that they are better than someone else.
Yeah.
And like, not only from firsthand experience, but like my family, there's a history of addiction. My dad's been sober at this point, I think almost 35 years.
Wow.
But this was after he left my mom for 8 years.
Mm.
He and my mother were together for a while, and he was pissed drunk, and he slept with somebody else at a party that he was with my mom at. Like this is something that most people would consider an unforgivable thing. Right. And my dad spent 8 years wallowing and doing all these things. He got married, he got divorced, he had his rock bottom moment and was like, you know what, I need to get to rehab. Like, I can't live like this. And as he was in rehab, he realized, like, as he was making amends and you know, going through his processes, he kind of realized, he was like, I let the love of my life go. Mm. He's like, the person that I cared about the most in this world, I let them go because I was drunk, and I was drunk and horny, and I was an idiot. Like, it's about not letting those things be the thing that defines you. Like, you don't know who you're going to be on, as you said, like on any substance. Yeah. Alcohol, heroin, steroids. You don't know. You are, literally, as you said, you're taking a chemical and putting it into your body that is literally changing the chemical makeup of your body. Yeah. you're not always that person. And like you are actively changing who you are by that thing. And sometimes it can have, no effect at all. Sometimes it can be, or not no effect, but like sometimes it's a positive effect where it's like, oh, when certain people drink, they open up, they feel more comfortable because the veil has been lifted in a lot of ways. Now, like in my journey, like learning that I shouldn't need a substance to lift that veil.
Right.
Like that was the thing that I needed to learn, was I shouldn't have to drink to be able to talk to people. I shouldn't have to, snort a line of Klonopin to get on stage. Like, these are things that I don't need to be who I am. But it also goes back to like the people who met me when I was doing those things and when I was that person. That's who I'm going to be to them forever. And it's something that I have to live with too. It's something that I have to sit here and be like, who I was, I didn't like. And likely a lot of people didn't like that person either. So I can't blame anyone for feeling how they feel about who I was or what I did. Because I probably feel the same way now that they did when they met me. And it's, as I said, it's important to at least give that person a chance. And like, and especially with, like we were talking about with heroin, like relapsing is so easy. It is so easy to fall back into those holes, man. You get into a really dark place and your body starts telling your brain, and your brain starts telling your body, you're like, hey, we never felt like this when we were drinking. We never felt like this when we were railing lines. We never felt like this, et cetera, et cetera. Let's go back to that other thing. Like when you don't necessarily have all of the coping mechanisms, when you haven't been to a therapist to help you find those things to navigate your life in a way that's safe, you're going to go back to what you know. So like when you talk about people who have done these awful things, etc., you don't know where they've been. You don't know what their thought process was. Right or wrong, that's actually not the point.
Right.
Whether they did something that, like, as you were talking about with Tim, like, roid rage is fucking is real. and if this dude was so roided out that he was like, I've got a good idea, I'm gonna hire someone to kill my wife, like, that doesn't necessarily mean that this is a bad person. This means that they had one bad day. And one bad day can shape your life forever.
Yeah.
If you fall into that pattern and you let those things take hold of you, it can ruin your life forever. And that is something that you have to learn. That's not something that you can be told and you're like, you know what? You're right. Next time I'm in that place, I'm going to make sure I don't do this thing. Like, no. You have to get there yourself. And the journey back to being a normal fucking person is a lot harder than anybody like gives credit to. And especially when you've lived most of your life like drinking every day, or most of your life fucking doing opiates, like you kind of have to relearn how to be a person. And we were kids, so we don't really remember what it was like forming our identities in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But having to re-identify yourself at any point in your life is not going to be an easy thing. And we kind of have to, as a culture, like, I am all aboard there are times where I'm like all aboard the cancel train, where it's like, no, this person is a repeat offender, doesn't matter what state of mind they're in, this is what they do. This has been repeatedly shown that this is who they are. Now, if they go through a court case and they are arrested and convicted, etc., and they come out of it realizing, fuck, who I was awful. And you're still holding them to the standard of who they were before. I mean, look at Robert Downey Jr. This dude had to go to prison to be like, oh shit, I was fucked up, dog. You have to get to that moment where you really realize that what you're doing is wrong and that you're not doing it for other people. Because that's another thing that happens with that I found, like, with getting sober and trying to change things about yourself, that when you do it for someone else, it doesn't stick.
No,
it's not going to. Like, it's when you're, like, for instance, if I were having drug issues if I were back having drug issues and I were and I were like super successful and famous or whatever, like, there is a point where not everything is black and white. Like, it's like that thing is, like, if I were super famous and I'm like, oh, I have to get sober for my image, that doesn't mean you're doing it for yourself. That means that you're doing it because you think you have to, not because you feel that you have to, not because you have that moment where you're like, this person that I am right now, this person I have become, whatever way you want to say it, is not who I want to be anymore. That for me is the moment where you're like, okay, maybe there is something here. But everybody's got their own journey. Everybody has been through their own personal hells. So there are things that are unforgivable, sure, but they're only unforgivable if you show no remorse for that.
Right.
If you are not actively doing the work and putting in the time to be like, no, this is the thing I have to change, then you know what? Everyone has the right to their own opinions, and if they see that you're not putting in the effort, that you're just doing the same thing every time, that's the way they're going to form their opinion. And that's why some people stay canceled just no matter what, because they're not putting in the work. But also, as we said, there's the other side to that, where people stay canceled even when they put in the work.
Yeah.
But it's actually up to you to not let that bother you, because it's other people's perspective. It's about how you see yourself and you understand what they see. Like, that's the flip of it, is that not only do you know how you see yourself, but you also have to understand why people are seeing what they're seeing or thinking what they're thinking about you.
Yeah.
It's it's a lot more complicated of an issue than we as a society give it credit for. Like, we are very quick, as you were saying, to to DeFi and cancel and be like, oh, this is it. This person did that thing, or this person is the problem. Like, it's not always the case. There's, you know, the idea of saying that there's two sides to every story, that's not really true. There are way more than two sides to every story.
Yeah.
And you also have to realize the word in itself that you're using, like the language you're using to a story. A story is what we tell children. A story is what if I were at the bar and I'd be like, oh, I got to tell you about this time that this crazy thing happened. That's a story.
Yeah.
Not my entire life.
Yeah.
So it's a really slippery slope with all of this. Like, I can't say that I don't think that people who perpetrate horrible things shouldn't receive punishment for that thing. But that doesn't mean that after the punishment they can't change. They can't realize, oh, I definitely should not have done any of those things.
Yeah.
It's not as cut and dry as anyone likes to think it is.
Kind of shifting topics, because you will have been one of the few people that I've had on where I could talk about this. So the last, as we now know it to be, the last two Every Time I Die shows, I assume with you living so close, you've probably been to other Christmas shows and had seen the band. Obviously, I think you and I were like, at that point I was like, oh, this will be like, with these two shows, technically I think it puts me at like 38 and 39 or whatever of seeing them. And I just saw them, you know, a couple of weeks ago, the second date of the tour that they were doing. Did it feel to you when, after the first set, that it took about 6-7 songs to sort of start feeling like it was a normal show? Because like there was nothing said on stage. It was just literally, if you've been to a show, you know that band flies all around each other, all over the stage. And I couldn't help but notice that just even in the presentation of the show, that it felt like a band that was having problems because everyone kind of kept to themselves for once, which is not normal.
So I can only speak to the second show because the first show, I was in Buffalo before the show. That's when we met.
Yep.
But actually, one of the people who raised me, my best friend's mom, who like actually brought me into Japanese culture and like helped teach me the language and taught me a lot about the culture and the food, and it's actually why like one of the things I like what I do for a living when I'm not making music is I make Japanese food, and I'm a sake-sam. Like I devoted myself to this culture because I was raised by this woman who accepted me and raised me as her other kid. Like the name that she called me was Jiro, which literally means second son. Which probably made my best friend's younger brother not feel great. But like I was always welcome, and and she had actually passed away earlier that week, so I missed the show because I had to go down to her cremation ceremony and be with the family. But I literally woke up the next morning at fuck o'clock a.m. to get back to Buffalo. Like, you know, once hardcore scum, always hardcore scum. Like I immediately was like, no, I gotta get back to the show. So I missed the first night, but I will say that when I watched them the second time, like I was wrapped up in just being able to see them that and get out the things that I needed to get out from, you know, losing a parent, essentially. Like, she was my other mother. She used to make me call her mom. So I lost my other mom, and it was something that I was kind of moshing through, if you will. Like, and but once we got to ETID, it definitely had like an eerie feel to it. But as you said, like it started one way and ended another. Like, it started off where it was like, you'll feel a little separated from each other, and then as the show went on, it was like, oh, this is back to feeling like ETID. This is back to feeling like the band. And I don't think when that show ended, I thought that was the end. I think that I felt that there was turmoil and things were going on, but I don't think I registered that this was it. Like, and as you were saying, like, it definitely felt a little off at first, but because of the way it ended, I was like, oh, bands get into fights with each other. Like, when you spend every waking moment with a dude in a van for God knows how long, eventually they're gonna learn where your buttons are and they're gonna fucking press them. Like, it just happens. Like, the dudes that I've worked with are some of my favorite people on the planet Earth, but that doesn't mean that they haven't found my buttons. Doesn't mean that at some point I wasn't like, if no one's looking, I'll just fucking throw them out of the van and no one will care. Like there's a certain point where, like, you get stir crazy, and being with the same people all the time gets to you. But you also have that realization where you're like, this is still my band. These are still the guys that I've chosen to do this with. These are still like my chosen family.
Right.
But also there is the flip side of that, where it's like, you especially with them, where they were actual family.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't just, oh, we're in a band together. They have been together their entire lives.
Yeah.
Like, that kind of shit is huge. And especially, like, as we were talking about earlier, like, if you're trying to make a change in your life, you have to be considerate of everyone around you, because you are effectively not the person you were 2 years ago or even 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And it sucks to see something that I love so dearly be torn apart, but it's like, it's also a part of life. Like, sometimes shit just hits the fan. And there's nothing really you can do about it. And it's funny, because my dad was sober for so long, I grew up around the serenity prayer. Like, that idea of surrendering yourself to the things you cannot change. And, like, there's an element of that kind of necessary to even look at the way things happened. It's like, there's nothing you could do about it. You could sit here and be like, oh, well, it's Keith's fault. Oh, well, it's Jordan's fault. Oh, well, it's not the point. Like, something happened that caused a rift, and now we have all lost something for it. And it sucks. Like, realizing that is the last time I'm likely ever going to see that band play sucks. I grew up like, I grew up seeing them. I used to come up to Buffalo just to see them. You know, I'd hop on a fucking megabus and be like, oh, they're playing at fucking Mohawk. They're playing at Town Ballroom. Like, I'm gonna go because I don't have anything else to do.
Right.
And so that they were such a big part of my life, and even not even just my life, but they were a big part of the scene. Like, there are so many bands that also wouldn't be who they are without these guys.
Yeah.
Like, I know that what I do wouldn't be what it is without, and not even just musically, like their stage presence, the way that they conducted themselves as a band. Like, there are things that I would never be doing now if I hadn't been, you know, if I hadn't pretty much grown up seeing these guys play. Like, I mean, for fuck's sake, I did a disco gig the other day and I crowd surfed. I was wearing like 3-inch white platform heels, bell bottoms, like the whole thing. I looked like you like ripped me out of the back alley behind Studio 54. But I was crowd surfing. It's just like, because that's how, like, there are just certain things that like are so intrinsic to who we are as musicians and as people that we just soak up. It's little things like that, and like that's, and like going back and reflecting on realizing that now I'm like, you know, it did seem like they were a little off when they started, and it did seem like this, and this. And like when they did all of the like the day after
Yep.
the serial stuff and all that, and Keith was AWOL, it was like, you know, that for me was like, oh, maybe I'm not going to see them ever again. And I guess I was just trying to be optimistic about it, where I was like, oh, you know, maybe they'll just take they'll take a break after their next tour because they already have everything lined up. Like, they'll do these shows and then they'll take a hiatus to kind of figure out what the fuck is going on. And then everything just fell apart, and it was like, it was watching a car crash, but it was watching a car crash of people you really cared about.
I think the thing, in doing this and in kind of befriending people who, you know, knew the guys and so forth in various levels, whether it be professionally or actual friendship ways, it was kind of weird because after the initial thing started happening like probably a week or so after the show here in Grand Rapids, you know, I was kind of getting fed through the pipeline like, yeah, it's bad. It's real bad. To where, you know, obviously we had tickets for the Christmas show, wasn't sure if it was going to happen. It did end up happening. I saw the first show, and I wanted to go see some other friends that, you know, Patrick has a bar in Buffalo that I wanted to go check out. Unbeknownst to me at the time, another friend that I've met from Buffalo literally lives right above it. So serendipitous that I decided to go to that and go do that. But it was one of those things where, you know, Ice's set was about to happen, and I just kind of looked at my wife and I was like, let's go after this. She was like, yeah. And I go, yeah, let's go after this. She goes, you don't want to stick around for any of the set, the ETID set? And I was like, no. I was like, last night was kind of weird. It got better. I don't know how today is going to be, but I'd rather have my memories of the band be what I remember the band to always have been, which is fun, to be an escape for a room full of people the community that they built over the 20 some odd years that they've been together. I go, and in that capacity, I got all that last night. It wasn't 100% how I wanted it to be, but I have more good memories than I want to have bad. And even a slight show like last night's will kind of tarnish it for me. So I don't want that. I'd rather it be, I want to go on a high note. So Ice-T was, he played his set. It was fucking great. I had a great time. It's the second time I got to see him do a rap set. And then we left. And I went and hung out with, Patrick at his bar and ended up meeting up with my friend for a little bit. And it was one of those where it's like, I think it kind of takes a differing perspective to understand that potentially what you're seeing is the realization of, like you said, being around someone so fucking long. That it's essentially, as you're talking about with your extended family, basically, of this is your extended family. These aren't, your bandmates, they're your brothers. And in this case, literally one of them is your brother. But it's one of those where there's just so much history, so much time together that unfortunately, I had made the comment to someone, I forget who, but I was like, we never heard anything bad about the band. Like no one ever had any problems that you heard of, no rehabs, no this person was unceremoniously kicked out, like nothing. And to see it just kind of go up in flames so fast, it was like, I think Keith kind of said it best. This was kind of probably how it was always going to happen because we never showed any signs of fatigue or wear and tear. We just kind of kept soldiering on, and we were the band that always was going to be there, and you can count on us until you couldn't. And it kind of was a weird way to realize that, like, that's sort of life too. Like the way that band existed and what they did was so pure, and so many of us, I would say, if you were to ask the same question of like, how did you feel about the band, breaking up or, how things ended, that it's like, we got really great music, really cathartic music, especially the last handful of records where I feel like it tapped into something of being an adult. And I don't know that, if the band would have put out Low Teens where Gutter Phenomenon was, where all I wanted to do was fucking party and have a good time. Like, it's funny when I look back at their discography, how it really kind of aligns with my life and where I was. And to kind of literally grow with a band. It's like, in my age, I don't really know that I'm going to get to grow with a band anymore. Not like that. Not where they're almost in a simpatico kind of relationship where it's like, you guys aren't much older than me. And so we're kind of hitting a lot of these things together, hearing a song, like Underwater Bimbos from Space, and knowing that, it kind of was a reflection of Keith going like, I'd come home and all these people have done everything. Like, they have kids, they have houses, they have all these things. And I don't. And I feel like I'm perpetually living as an adolescent because of my career, which is actually what it is, even though societally and maybe from my friend's perspective, it's not. And as I look back on those lyrics and those times, I kind of realized that was sort of me. Like, I wasn't finding my way in a career in music, but like I was so ensconced in it, and I always kind of wanted something a little left of center than what the normal thing was.
Yep.
And so in that, and in that band, collectively, you kind of saw yourself reflected in a lot of different ways, everyone kind of getting to do other things that made them happy, like you have the intellect in Keith, and, he reads all these books. And so therefore it kind of stimulates that part of your brain, Jordan being more of an artist, as well as a musician, kind of stimulate, like you see yourself in that, seeing Andy kind of being like, I love wrestling and some of these weird things, old movies. It's like, all right, I see myself in him, Mitch kind of being the man of many side hustles. It's like, oh my God, that's me. And then, something kind of right in the middle where it's changed, between Rat Boy and Legs and Goose and even Daniel, that it's like, you see what each of them brought to the band and their different iterations or eras of the band. And again, it's just hard not to see yourself in that band represented. And that throughout it all, it was always kind of us against everybody. And we do this uncompromisingly because we need to. And
yeah, in a lot of ways, like, yeah, I was going to say, like, just a quick interjection is like,
yeah,
I think one of the hard things about it is that even though we, some of us were actually friends with the guys, but like, it felt like we lost our friends.
Yeah.
Like and exactly what you're saying is like, I grew up with them, but as you were saying that, I didn't realize how much those words actually meant. It's like, it's not that I just grew up with them around. I actually like grew up with this music kind of vaguely hitting a lot of the points in my life, and the struggles as well as the high points, and like and things like that. Like as you were just saying, you know, Keith struggling with, you know, being in a band and having that be his career, but not have other people view it as a viable way to continue. Like I didn't go to college. I went right from high school. I started playing gigs and working in restaurants. That's immediately what I did out of school. And like there's tons of things that I think, you know, if I had lived a more conventional life, if I had gone to college and gotten a degree or whatever, what would I be doing? Sure, I could, you know, go down that path all day long, but really it's it's also about like just kind of keep that forward motion, and that's why it, like as you said, like we weren't expecting this because we'd never heard anything very specifically. Like obviously there's been like little fights here and there, if you were like privy to said information, and like there was shit that happened, but that happens with everybody,
Right.
you know. As I said, like you spend enough time with somebody, eventually you're gonna want to punch them in the face. Whether you do or not is a different story. But hell, there are people I have punched in the face that are still my friends. Like, so like it you really honestly put it into perspective for me, because I don't think I put it that succinctly, and realizing like with the things that were happening in low teens and the feelings that were coming through low teens. Excuse me. They thank you. These last two records were cathartic. There was a lot more adult emotion, like things that we feel as adults that we have to reconcile with, that obviously was not the subject matter of albums previous.
No.
But it had always kind of been there. And the whole situation sucks. It just does. But it also, you know, things change, and there's nothing really you can do about it. People grow, people shrink. It happens. And it sucks that it happened to somebody, to people that we had grown to associate with this stability almost. We'd grown to associate these guys with always being there and always being the band we could count on. So when this all happened, that's as you said, like it felt like it felt like the rug was being pulled out from under us. But, you know, also these things have been there for a while and they just weren't addressed.
Yeah. I think it's the first time I've really, other than, and I'll tell you when we're done here in a couple of minutes, but it's one of the few times where I felt like a product of divorce, even though my parents are still together. So I don't know what that's like, but it's definitely what I feel like it probably is like, because it starts well, whose side are you taking? And even though at this point there's no new music out from either side, it almost feels like a sense of like, well, I have to only, whatever side I choose is the side I choose forever. And it's like, the only time that I've made this comment to some friends, and I go, I don't want kids. My wife and I aren't going to have any. But I had made the comment a while ago. I was like, I sometimes feel like in healthy versions of this, children that are products of divorce actually probably get to live a better life. And I feel like it's a better life for even the parents, because you get to have that part of you that you feel like you sort of lose, where you get to kind of go do whatever you want to do for a couple of days, or whatever the situation looks like for you and your significant other with child care and all that. But I feel like it's like, because then when I get my kid, that I want that time. I'm craving that time because I haven't seen you. And then there isn't that fatigue of, man, I want to go do this, but I can't because I got to spend time with the wife and the kid, and you're kind of being pulled in a couple of different directions. And I know that there are a lot of parents that probably are able to do it just fine. But I feel like at times I see that and I go, I feel like it's actually almost a little bit better. And maybe like couples who are together who have kids, I almost wonder if there's a way that you could utilize what like parents of divorce kind of go, or parents who are divorced kind of go through, and find a happier balance of, you know what, you go take your day to day or whatever, I'll take mine in a couple of days, you watch the kid, whatever. And you kind of live that life without having to kind of go through the heartbreak and all of that kind of stuff of it. But I feel like at that point, it's a win-win-win for everybody from what I've seen. And I feel like
I mean, if it's handled correctly, I see exactly
if it's handled correctly, yes.
Yeah, I see exactly what you're saying. But also, like, as somebody who is not a child of divorce, but has tons of friends who are, pretty much every person that I know who's a child of divorce, it was a battlefield. It was.
Well, you're used as leverage from what I get, but.
Yeah, like, and that's exactly, like, you're used as leverage, or like, one of my friends, like, with one of her parents, she felt like she was less than, because even though she hadn't, it was like one of her parents had felt like they'd already chosen the side, so they felt like they already lost the kid, so they were kind of shitty about it. They were kind of like, oh well, you're with your other parents, so like you enjoy that time more than you do with me. And it's like, did I ever say that? Did that ever come out of my mouth? No. But but I do see what you're talking about, like, especially with this, where we're having to, or feeling like you have to choose.
Yeah.
I mean, in general, having to choose between two things that you care about is never a thing that's fun. I mean, for fuck's sake, there's a movie about it called Sophie's Choice. Like that's not a thing that you ever want to fucking do.
Right.
So like when you're forced to make that decision, either be it through divorce or, having your friends break up, and you're like, what the fuck am I going to do now? Like, if you're friends with both of those people individually, and then you're like, oh shit, well, I guess we're fucked. Like, but either way, it sucks no matter what way you put it.
Yeah.
Like, you're and that's kind of that I see is more like where we're at with ETID, is that, like, either way you throw it, it's just kind of a shitty situation.
Absolutely. Well, I know you got to get ready for work, and I got to go do the same here in a minute or two. Where can everyone find you, or anything that you would like to plug that's online that people can follow and keep up with you?
So my band is called No Chance for Closure. You can find us Instagram, Facebook, follow us on all of the things, Spotify, whatever. We are everywhere, because these days you kind of have to be. And then my personal Instagram is J-Bat the Cryptid. Just because my entire life I've been bigger than all the people around me, so I've always been called either a Yeti or a Sasquatch. So I kind of just leaned into it. I'm like, yeah, I'm a fucking cryptid. I was like, maybe one day I'll be a skinwalker. Fuck it. But that's J-Bat the Cryptid. You can follow me on Instagram. The restaurant that I mostly do my stuff at in New York City is Moonrise Izakaya. Like, and honestly, like, if anybody wants to talk about any of the things we talked about today with me, reach out, dude. I'm as somebody who's also a bar person, like, I'm always down to talk. So
yeah. Well, I'm glad we finally got a chance to do this in light of the bar ruining it for me many, many times. Actually, it almost happened again today. I was like, my other door guy who's supposed to work tonight's like, hey man, I got swamped at work, my day job. Can you work tonight? And I was like, no, I can't. I'm going to a show later. So sorry, man.
Yeah, I would have just hit him for the with the Randy Jackson. That's gonna be a no from me, dog. Like, just send him the GIF.
Well, he helped me out when I got really sick a couple of weeks ago, or about a month or two ago. And I was like, I can't do it. Can you cover for me? So I owe him one, but I also was like, I can't do it tonight. Like another time.
Yeah, but also like there's owing somebody one, and like sometimes you just can't follow through. Like I would do anything that I could, but that also means if I can.
Yeah. Yep. Well, it was great chatting with you, and I'm sure we'll be in contact after this.
Oh, regardless. Yeah. That sounds about right.
So that was my conversation with Josh. Again, I want to thank him for taking the time to talk to me. Essentially, a stranger he met in a bar and then kind of revealed. It's so weird because sometimes, like, you know, I think we as people are apt to call them setbacks or diseases or all of these things. But sometimes I don't know if I feel that way. I know I talk constantly with my friends and so forth about, you know, growing up with a cleft lip and palate and a lot of the surgeries and the adversities kind of I went through to overcome a lot of those things of my childhood and whatnot. And I look back and I'm like, it's weird because when I talk to some people, you know, they say like, oh, that's so, you know, you went through so much. You're so brave as a kid or as a person or whatever. And to me, it's like, well, it's just what you go through. It's, you know, I kind of had to. You look at it differently than I think others do from the outside because it's just what you deal with. It's what you've known. And so I don't necessarily look at some of these things as a limitation, as a setback. I mean, they obviously are for various reasons, but it is one of those where, you know, hearing Josh open up and you know, as he kind of told me after the fact, you know, he's never really talked about his addictions. He's never talked about some of the things that he's gone through in his life that he talked about in this chat. And I was really surprised. But it was kind of reaffirming because, you know, a lot of people tell me, and I'm vocalizing this because I know there are probably others who go through this as well. And I want maybe people to understand how to be better at this, which is, you know, a lot of people have told me that getting people to open up and so forth is a skill. And I'm learning to feel better about, like, yes, that is a skill, because I don't think it's a skill to learn how to communicate. I think everyone can do it. I think, you know, some are better than others, and I don't think I'm necessarily the best at it, but I have learned, and I've been learning to take compliments as they come, but I've also tried to be more comfortable in realizing that I have something that maybe others don't, and that's what makes me unique. You know, I constantly say that everyone's got a story and everyone has something unique about them. But it's funny that when I think about myself, I don't feel like I have that. I had actually just had a conversation with, I think, my wife the other day, and it was how I was saying, you know, a lot of people want to be kind of the alpha person, that, you know, their opinion is the main one that, you know, everyone listens to and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, I kind of likened it to sports because, you know, I'm very big into various sports, team sports especially, but I was like, you know, sometimes you do have that de facto number one person, and I go, but you can't have a whole team of that doesn't work. Like, you need to find people who want to be role players, as they're called, and I feel like that's something that I'm good at. I feel is I'm good at setting people up to be successful, being a good cheerleader of sorts as well. And being comfortable within your role. And it doesn't mean that role can't change, but that's kind of the role I play, I feel like, a lot in my life for other people. But I'm learning to be better at taking compliments and taking praise and kind of being more self-confident in myself. And I think that was something that kind of also, I think, comes through in this conversation with Josh, is that, we both have found our way through something that we're passionate about, but we've also found the strength to be more of us and to be happy with yourself, I guess, happy with the things you do, and to know that you provide something for somebody, and that you should be, stoked on that. You should want to kind of embrace that a little more, and maybe be not braggy, but be a bit more excited about these things, and to kind of lean into them more. Speaking of leaning into more, I really do want to talk about this beer I had. So the other day I bought, and I posted on our socials, but I bought a random 6-pack of beer, as you know I am often to do. And so I ended up finding this company, 450 North Brewing. And what drew me initially was this place I go to called Ricci's. They posted their new cold beverage section for the areas of beer that are in the freezers or coolers that you can buy that are already cold. And the thing about this that looked interesting was, it had like these marshmallows and these like cookies, but everything of 450 North kind of leans into weed. So the cookies that are on this can are weed shaped, and it's called the can was called Fluffables, and this was a slush mallow fluffable, and it was one of those where it's a strawberry marshmallow shortcake slushy, and it was crazy how much it tasted like that. Like, very recently I was talking about the cherry funfetti birthday cake sour beer and how much I love that. And that no one had really kind of gotten that perfect cake flavor for me in a beer. Well, I'm here to tell you this one, a few weeks later, I'm eating my words, or I should say I'm drinking them. But this thing was really good, and I'm really glad it was. And thanks to a friend of the podcast for sending me a gift card to Ricci's, because at almost $10 a can, I don't think I would have gotten it by myself. Because that's really where I start drawing the line of like what I'm willing to spend on a beer. But this is an incredible new to me brewery, and I'm very excited to try more of their stuff. Obviously, it's not infused with THC or CBDs or anything, so I think it's just clever branding on their part. But it was a really delicious beer. It wasn't super thick like I thought it would be based on looking at it. To me, it was nice and sweet. It's definitely one of those I don't think I would have, like, I'm not going to sit down and drink 6 or 7 of them, especially not at that price point. But it is definitely one of those where it's fun to try it. I had some friends over, they tried it, they loved it too. And it was one of those where it's like, that's the fun of getting a beer like that, is to share it and to kind of share new things with people, which is what this conversation with Josh kind of was all about. So wrapping up this episode, if you would like to keep up with Josh, you can find him at jbat.batista on Facebook. You can find him at jbatthecryptid on Instagram. I didn't find him on Twitter. That could just be I'm spelling something wrong, although not, but I didn't find him there. And if you would like to keep up with this band, you can go to nochanceforclosure.com. Like I said, they're hitting the road with Johnny Craig, and I know the Emo Night Brooklyn stuff is still going on. I know he is making the way out here to Grand Rapids for the Emo Night Brooklyn thing. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if someone from Michigan or the surrounding area maybe came down and did that, because it seems like they always have guests performing at those things. So keep up with him, see what he's doing, check him out, and hopefully this chat endears you to him, and you can kind of see why, we kind of felt this connection, or I did initially, sitting at one of my favorite dive bars in Buffalo, New York, and wanted to have a further conversation with him. So thanks for checking this out. If you would like to keep up with the podcast, simple enough, Brew Speak Pod everywhere. If you would like to keep up and support the show monetarily, you can go to our Patreon, patreon.com/brewspeakpod. Thanks to our sponsors, once again, Rockabilia. Use our code BRUTALLY at checkout, save 10% off your total purchase order. On Point Pomade, use our code BSP15, take 15% off your purchase order. And last but not least, the Bean Bastard Coffee. Head over to thebeanbastard.com, pick up some delicious coffee if you happen to be in the Buffalo, New York area. go to the brick and mortar store. There are some things that we are working on together. I think you can infer from that what you will, but we're in the infancy stages of that. I'd also at this point like to shout out that you'll probably have already seen it on our socials for the Patreon people. It hasn't been announced yet, so you are literally seeing the 6-pack that has been revealed. That is what I've been teasing. I am doing a monthly curated 6-pack at Rishi's where I pick beers, and then typically you will see a little synopsis of why I pick them. And I'm hoping that it will kind of allow people to maybe explore the world of craft beer and ciders and all of those kind of things, and try things that maybe you wouldn't based on me picking them for you. So it's something I've been long wanting to do. And after seeing Vox and Hops basically doing theirs, I kind of had the idea to do the similar thing. And I'm very excited to roll this out. I love Rishi's as a store. It's where I typically go to get my stuff, and couldn't be happier to have a home to kind of do this and curate a monthly 6-pack. So if you live in the area, please go pick it up. I'm usually trying to make it very cost efficient at about $20-$25 per 6-pack, while still offering you plenty of awesome beers from all over, and a slightly different beer, not just always like here's all the stouts, here's all the porters, here's all the IPAs and so forth, but a nice well-rounded pack. So there will be more talked about probably about that. And and for the Brutally Speaking podcast, I am John, and I will talk to you all next week. We have John from Moontooth on. That was a really fun chat. Had just seen the guys as they came through on the Dance Gavin Dance Tour. And a lot of great things. So excited to get that one out to you. Have a good week, and I'll talk to you then.